This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome to Her Extraordinary Life by Design, where we celebrate women who are shaping their lives one extraordinary day at a time. I'm your host, Leslie Gaudet, self-care coach for women who are ready to make self-care a priority to support them in life and business. Every week, I'll be speaking with inspiring women from various walks of life who will share their personal journeys and will discover how they have fearlessly carved their own paths as business owners, passionately pursuing their dreams and creating a meaningful impact on their communities. So let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to Extraordinary Life by Design podcast. I'm your host, Leslie Gaudet, and I want to say something to you today that maybe and probably nobody in your world is saying, and that is that you need more sleep than you're getting. And the fact that you're still functioning isn't proof that you're fine. It's proof that you're compensating. And the longer you keep calling it fine, the wider the gap gets between how capable you look and how depleted you actually are. Now, I'm not saying this to be harsh. I'm saying it because I know this woman. I've navigated versions of this myself. And I know that for most high-achieving women, the sleep compromise isn't happening because we don't value rest. It's happening because somewhere along the way, operating on less became something that was normalized so completely that you stopped questioning it. It became the baseline, the 5-hour sleeps that still produced results, the early mornings that started before anyone else was up, the late nights that stretched long past when they should have ended, and the internal satisfaction that came with believing, like really believing, that you could handle what most people around you couldn't, that your threshold was higher than everyone else's, that your capability was stronger than everyone else, and that what everyone else seems to need simply doesn't apply to you. That identity, the woman who functions on less sleep, has been costing you things you haven't been connecting back to sleep at all. Like the decision that takes longer than it should and it leaves you feeling less certain than you used to. Or the emotional response that surfaced without warning, landed harder than you expected, and it stayed with you far longer than the moment deserved. And the quality of thinking that used to arrive easily and effortlessly now has to be pushed for. And that groundedness, that settled sense of being steady in your own body, that's become harder to access. None of those feel like sleep problems, right? They feel like the demands of a full life. They feel like the complexity of what you're navigating. They feel like the season that you're in. And so you attribute them there and you keep going because the output's still intact, you're still delivering, and by every visible measure, you're handling it. But here's what I want you to consider today. The output still being there isn't, nor has it ever been, proof that everything's okay. It's proof that you've built an incredibly sophisticated system for compensating, one that keeps the results visible while the cost stays hidden. But compensation has a ceiling, and most high-achieving women don't discover where their ceiling is until the cost has already been accumulating for a very long time. So that's what this episode's about. Not about sleep hygiene, not about bedtime routines, and not about a list of things to add to an already full life, but an honest conversation about what's happening inside a nervous system that's never fully been restored and what that's been costing women who have convinced themselves that they're fine. So picture Maya. Maya's the kind of woman who's always known how to deliver through experience, through showing up when it was hard, through proving over and over again that she can handle what most people around her can't. And somewhere in that proving, she developed a particular kind of pride. Not the loud kind, but the kind that lives in the fact that she needs less than most people seem to need. Less support, less recovery time, less sleep. She's been running on 5 hours sleep per night, sometimes less, sometimes a little more, but she genuinely can't remember what 7 or even 8 hours feels like. And she doesn't think about it much because she's fine. She's always fine. She gets up before anyone else in the house does. She handles the first wave of emails before her feet have fully hit the floor. She moves through her day with a kind of momentum that looks from the outside like someone who has it completely together. But here's what's happening underneath that momentum. The decisions that used to feel clear have started to feel heavy, like she's wading through something she can't quite name. She'll sit with a choice that 6 months ago would have taken her 30 seconds and finds herself going in circles, second guessing, rereading, coming back to it again later, even when her judgment was sound the first time. And her emotional reactions, she's noticed those too. The way a comment from a colleague or friend lands harder than it should, and the way she'll feel a flash of something like frustration or irritation or a tightness in her chest. And she knows somewhere underneath it that the reaction doesn't quite match the moment, but she can't stop it before it moves through her. The buffer she used to have, that space between what happens and how she responds, that's gotten thinner, and she doesn't know exactly when that happens. Then there's the work itself, the thinking that used to feel like hers, sharp, creative, that ability to see around corners that people in her world have come to count on. It's still there, but it takes longer to access. She has to push for it now in a way that she didn't used to have to. And she'll have moments at the end of the day where she looks at what she produced and think, that took twice as long as it should have. And Maya does what capable women do with observations like these. She files them away. She attributes it to the season, to the workload, to the fact that she's got a lot going on right now and things will settle eventually. She adds another coffee to the morning. She pushes through the afternoon slump and tells herself, everyone feels this way sometimes. And then one evening, she's sitting at the end of a day that looked successful on paper, where things got done, she delivered, no one would look at her day and say anything was off. And she realizes she can't remember a single moment in her day where she felt like herself, where she felt at ease, calm. Not a single moment where something flowed easily, not a moment of clarity that didn't require effort to reach. Not one point in the day where she felt rested enough to actually be present for any of it. And she thinks quietly in the way women like Maya think things are not ready to say out loud yet. Is this just what it is now? Is this just what this level requires, or is something wrong with me? But the thing is, nothing's wrong with Maya. Something has been quietly running in the background for a very long time, and she hasn't stopped long enough to look at it. Because looking at it would require admitting something she's been working very hard not to admit, that the operating system running everything, her decisions, her patience, her creativity, her capacity to be present for the life she's worked so hard to build, all of that has been running without ever being fully restored. And she doesn't know what it's actually costing her. So here's what I want to ask you. And I want you to actually sit with it rather than answering it automatically. When's the last time you woke up and felt genuinely ready for your day? Not just functional, not just caffeinated enough to get moving, but actually ready, restored, clear, present before the day even started. And if you had to think about it, if an answer didn't come immediately, that's worth paying attention to, right? Because for a lot of high achieving women, that experience has become so infrequent that they stopped expecting it. And somewhere along the way, stopped noticing it was missing. So here's what I want to explore with you today. First, we're going to talk about why sleep deprivation becomes invisible when you're performing at a high level. Not invisible to your body, but invisible to you. And why the women who need restoration most are often the ones least likely to prioritize it, and what that's costing them in ways that have nothing to do with tiredness. That's the first lens. The second lens that we're going to explore is what's actually happening inside a nervous system that never fully restores. Because the cost isn't just feeling tired, it shows up in places most women aren't connecting back to sleep at all, in their decision making, in their emotional responses, in the quality of their thinking, and in the widening gap between how capable they look and how depleted they actually feel. And finally, the third lens we're going to explore is we're going to dive into what thriving actually feels like. Because if you've been functioning long enough, functioning starts to feel like thriving. And that might be the most expensive confusion of all. So that's where we're going today. Not the surface level conversations about sleep habits most people are having, but a conversation about what's been running in the background, quietly and consistently, while you've been busy proving you can operate without ever being fully rested. Now, there's something that happens in high performance culture that almost nobody names directly. And it lives inside a belief so normalized and so celebrated that most women carrying it have never once stopped to question it. It doesn't announce itself as a belief at all, actually. It sounds more like a fact, like something you've simply proven about yourself over time. And it sounds like, I don't need as much sleep as most people. I've always been able to function on less. 5 hours is plenty for me. I've been doing this for most of my life, and I'm fine. And underneath those statements, underneath what sounds like a neutral observation about your body, there's something else, almost a sort of pride like feeling. Because in a world where high achieving has become the norm, the ability to operate on less sleep has become its own kind of credential. The woman who's up at 5 and still responding to emails at 11, the woman who slept 5 hours a night during a big launch and she still delivered, never missing a beat, the woman who never lets sleep be the reason something doesn't get done, that woman is admired. That woman is seen as serious, a force to be reckoned with. That woman is seen as someone who has what it takes. And so the belief takes root, not as something imposed on you, but as something you claim, something you built your identity around. Because in a culture that rewards output and visibility and the appearance of tireless capability, needing less sleep starts to feel like an advantage, like you had somehow optimized yourself in a way that others hadn't. And the belief gets reinforced because every time you pulled off something impressive on insufficient rest and no one knew, every time a colleague mentioned how tired they were and you thought quietly without saying it, I'm fine. Every time you got through a full day on 4 or 5 hours sleep and everything appeared to go smoothly, that evidence kept stacking up. So that leaning into, see, I can do this. I don't need what everyone else needs. That was proof that you're built differently, that your capacity is something others simply don't have. But here's what I want you to consider. Just because you can function on 5 hours sleep a night until it catches up with you, by the way, your nervous system doesn't know you're part of this. It doesn't factor in your capability or your track record or how many impressive things you've accomplished on insufficient rest. It just knows whether it's been restored or whether it hasn't. And when it hasn't, consistently over time, it starts to adapt, not by shutting down right away and not always by making the problem obvious, but over time, it starts recalibrating what it's able to give you. And that recalibration is where the belief gets expensive because what starts to shift first isn't your output. Your output stays impressive. That's actually part of what makes it so hard to see. What shifts is the quality of what's running underneath the output because the decisions that used to feel clean, they start to feel heavy, right? Feel heavier than usual, more effortful than you remember them being. The emotional responses that surface faster than the moment warrants because a depleted nervous system can't tell the difference between what deserves a reaction and what doesn't. The creative thinking that used to arrive easily and effortlessly now has to be pushed for. But because you don't connect any of it to sleep, because you're functioning, because your work is still getting done, because you've done this for so long that the version of yourself running on chronic deprivation has become your baseline, you've forgotten what the other version of you feels like, the calmer, clearer, more present one. So when you keep attributing the friction to everything else, the workload, the season, the stress, the fact that you have a lot going on right now, and you keep wearing the low sleep hours like a badge of honor because in your world it still reads as strength, even as the gap between how capable you look and how restored you actually are keeps widening, you keep telling yourself it's fine, that you're fine. And beliefs like this don't announce their cost. They don't send a clear signal that something needs to change. They just make everything cost a little more internally. Because from the outside looking in, everything still looks fine. There's no obvious signal that anything's off. You hide it well, which is why the cost goes unnoticed until the gap becomes too wide to explain away. And I know that if this is what you do, that you're not pushing sleep aside because you don't understand its value. You know that rest matters. So the issue isn't awareness. The issue is the tug of war that happens every single night between what your body's asking for and what the list is still asking of you. And the lists usually win. Not because you don't care about your health, but because in the moment at 10:30, at 11, at midnight, productivity feels more urgent than restoration. The email feels more pressing than sleep. The preparation for tomorrow feels more responsible than honoring what today took from you. And so rest gets pushed again with the promise that you'll catch up eventually. But here's what most people don't know. Chronic sleep deprivation doesn't just cost you energy. It costs you the ability to accurately assess what it's costing you. Let me repeat that. Chronic sleep deprivation doesn't just cost you energy. It costs you the ability to accurately assess what it's costing you. The very judgment you would need to recognize the impairment has been impaired, which means the woman who's most affected is often the one most convinced she's fine, not because she's in denial, but because her brain, running on a chronic deficit, is genuinely producing a distorted read on her own performance. And studies show that people who are chronically sleep deprived consistently overestimate how well they're functioning because they feel capable, they feel sharp, and they have no accurate internal reference point for what sharp actually feels like anymore because they haven't been there in so long. And this is where it gets expensive in ways that never gets tracked. Because what chronic sleep deprivation erodes first isn't your output. What erodes first is the quality of the internal experience producing that output. The decisions that get made but cost twice the cognitive energy they should have. not because the decisions are hard, but because a brain operating on insufficient rest is working significantly harder to produce the same results as a brain that's been fully restored. It's running a process that should take 30 seconds, but instead it's taking 30 minutes. And you don't notice it because the decision still got made, right? You just didn't notice how much it took from you to get there. The emotional response that arrives before you can intercept it, not because something genuinely warranted the reaction, but because a chronically depleted nervous system loses its capacity to distinguish between what deserves a response and what doesn't. The filter that separates signal from noise, the one that allows you to receive something and choose how to respond, that filter gets thinner with every night of insufficient rest. And what fills the gap isn't calm, it's reactivity that feels like you. Then there's what happens to the quality of your thinking, not the volume of your thinking. You're still producing thoughts at the same rate, but the depth of it, the creative connection between ideas that used to arrive unexpectedly, easily, the strategic clarity that used to surface without being forced, the ability to hold complexity and find the thread through it, the thing that makes you exceptional at what you do, that capacity, it requires something specific. It requires a brain that's had uninterrupted time to consolidate, process, and restore overnight. And when that restoration has been consistently incomplete, that quality of thinking requires more effort to access. You work for what used to arrive. You push for clarity that used to feel natural. And because the output's still acceptable, you never connect the dots, the effort, to its actual source. And your body, underneath all of it, is absorbing what the mind is too busy to notice. Immune function that requires more recovery time than it used to. Hormonal patterns that feel slightly dysregulated in ways that are difficult to name. A physical groundedness that's settled and body sense of being present in your own body has become increasingly difficult to access. None of which announces itself as a sleep problem, all of which gets attributed to age, to stress, to the season, to having a lot on your plate. And what ties it all together is that the friction increases so gradually that each new level of depletion becomes a new baseline. You see, you're not comparing yourself to a well rested version of yourself anymore. You're comparing yourself to yesterday's depleted version. And by that measure, you're always fine because the bar keeps moving with you. That's the hidden architecture of sleep debt. Not one dramatic collapse, not a visible breaking point, just a woman who keeps delivering impressively and consistently, while the gap between what she's capable of and what she's currently accessing keeps widening. And you don't know what you're missing because you can't remember what having it felt like. And that forgetting is actually where the shift begins. Not in being told what you've been missing, but in the moment you remember. Because here's what I want you to understand. You can't think your way into this shift. You can't read enough about sleep science to make it happen. And you can't be persuaded into it by someone telling you that rest matters. You already know that rest matters. What changes everything is something different. It's the moment that you feel the difference from the inside. And once you feel it, once your nervous system experiences what genuine restoration actually feels like, that's when something becomes impossible to unknow, to unsee. So let me ask you something. Have you ever had a morning, maybe recently, maybe it's been a while, where you woke up and something was different before the day even started? Not the kind of morning where you dragged yourself to the coffee maker and you manufactured enough momentum to get going, but a morning where you felt clear, steady, present in a way that didn't require effort, where the first thought wasn't already three tasks ahead, where your body felt like something you were inhabiting rather than something you were managing. If you even had one morning like that, even one, your nervous system already knows what I'm talking about. It knows the difference because it has the reference points. The problem isn't that you don't know what thriving feels like. The problem is that you've accepted its absence as normal. And here's what that absence is actually costing you. Not just the tiredness, not just the friction, but the standard. Because when you've been functioning for long enough, functioning starts to feel like thriving, where the bar drops so gradually that the depleted version of you becomes the version you measure everything against. And by that measure, you're always fine, even when you're running at a fraction of what you're actually capable of. This is the shift that matters. Not adding a new habit, not optimizing your evening routine, but reclaiming the standard by deciding with the same clarity and conviction you bring to everything else in your life that functioning is the floor, not the ceiling. Because the distance between functioning and thriving is not small. It's the difference between decisions that feel clean and decisions that feel like wading through quicksand, between emotional responses that match the moment and responses that arrive before you can intercept them, between creative thinking that surfaces and creative thinking that has to be excavated, between feeling at home in your own body and feeling like it's working against you every single day. And the woman on the thriving side of that line isn't a different woman. She's you with a restored nervous system, with a brain that has been given what it needs to process and come back to you fully, with access to the steadiness, the clarity, and the quality of thinking that's always been yours. But that chronic deprivation has been quietly taxing for longer than you've been willing to admit. And when you feel that, when you have even one morning where you wake up genuinely restored and you notice what's available to you, your relationship with sleep changes. Not because someone convinced you it should, not because you read something that scared you into it, but because you can no longer accept the gap between what you've been experiencing and what you just felt. The rest that used to feel like something you had to earn starts to feel like something you owe the system that carries everything. The sleep you used to negotiate away starts to feel like the infrastructure it actually is. And that badge, the pride in needing less sleep and proving that you could operate without it, it starts to feel like it belonged to a version of you that was working far harder than she ever needed to. And the question changes too. It stops being, can I function on this? Because the answer to that question was always yes. But that yes was never the right standard. What the question becomes is, what am I leaving on the table every single day by accepting functioning as enough? Because here's the truth. You're not a machine that runs on the minimum input required to keep producing. You're a woman whose exceptional capability, whose clarity, whose creativity, whose capacity to lead and decide and be genuinely present for the life she's building, she depends on a nervous system that has been restored. Not occasionally, not when you're on vacation, but consistently as a non negotiable, as the foundation everything's built on. And the most direct thing I can say to you is that treating sleep as infrastructure isn't something you get to do once you've proven you deserve it. It's the single most high leverage decision a high achieving woman can make for the quality of everything she's trying to build and sustain. You see, you've been proving for a long time that you can function without adequate sleep, without the restoration your nervous system was designed for and has always required. And you've been able to sustain this for a very long time. But functioning was never what you were capable of. It was just what you accepted when you stopped believing you were allowed to ask for more. Now, I know that was a lot, and I hope that I didn't offend you, but I need to be real and honest with you and not cookie cutter it when it comes to talking about this most important subject of sleep, of rest, because your energy depends on it. And so does everything else, especially if your desire is to live a quality life. So let's take a moment to pause before we move into anything else, just to let what we've been sitting with today actually settle for you. Because I think there's something that happens when you can finally stop long enough to look at something you've been moving too fast to notice, to examine it, and to really unpack. And it doesn't always feel comfortable right away. Sometimes it can feel like you're pouring alcohol on an open wound and it stings before it heals, right? But it can also feel liberating because you're finally recognizing a pattern of something you already knew, but you hadn't let yourself admit. So while you think about this, I want to ask you, when's the last time you woke up feeling genuinely restored? Not just functional, not caffeinated into readiness, but actually restored, where your body felt ready before you asked anything of it, where your mind was clear before you had to push for clarity, and where you moved into your morning from a place of ease rather than momentum manufactured from willpower. And whatever comes to mind, especially if the remembering is a strong, I don't know, I don't want you to make that wrong. I just want you to see it. Because for many high achieving women, the experience of waking up genuinely restored has become so infrequent, they've stopped expecting it and stopped noticing when the last time was. And when you stop expecting something, you stop tracking its absence, which means the cost keeps accumulating without ever being named. I also want you to think about this. What have you been explaining away as the season, the workload, the age, the complexity of life right now that might actually have insufficient rest underneath it? Like decision fatigue that's been arriving earlier and staying longer than it used to. The emotional responses that arrive faster than the moment warrants and linger longer than they should, leaving you wondering why something that small took so much out of you. The creative thinking that used to feel like yours, but now it requires more effort to access. Like you just can't seem to access that sharp, effortless thinking the way you used to back when you felt genuinely energized rather than just functional. What I'm asking you to do is just to notice. You don't have to have all the answers right now. All I'm saying is that I just want you to be honest with yourself about what you've been explaining away. And then what would change if your nervous system was consistently restored, not occasionally, but as a baseline? What would your decisions feel like if they were coming from a brain that had been genuinely restored rather than one that was managing on a deficit? What would your relationships feel like if the buffer between stimulus and response, that internal space that allows you to choose rather than react, was consistently available to you? And what would your work feel like if the thinking that makes you exceptional arrived the way it used to, without having to push for it, without having to strain to reach something that should already be yours? Just sit with that, not to figure out how to get there, but just to feel how much distance might actually exist between where you are and what's actually been available to you. And finally, what belief about sleep are you ready to examine? Because I know that for most women, it isn't information that's been standing between you and rest. It's something older than the information, something that sounds like pride, something that sounds like I've always been someone who can do more on less. That's just who I am. And I want to gently offer this to you. That belief was built on a context, meaning it was shaped by a culture that rewarded it, reinforced by a career that confirmed it, and protected by an identity that made it feel like strength. But identity isn't biology. And the story you've been telling about what your body needs and what it means about you, if it needs more, that story is worth examining. And I've sat with this myself. The moments where I noticed I was running on insufficient rest and I told myself it was fine, that I was fine because the output was still there. And what I've come to understand is that the output being intact was never the right measure because the woman producing that output was working harder than she needed to, pushing for access to things that should have been available without pushing, and managing an internal experience that shouldn't have required that much management. So I started asking myself a different question. Instead of asking, can I function? I started asking, what am I not accessing because I've accepted functioning as enough? And that question changed something for me. Not all at once, but in the way recognitions tend to change things, slowly and then undeniably. So just sit with what came up for you today, what you notice, what you recognize, what you've been explaining away that might deserve a different examination. Because awareness is always where it begins, right? And you've just given yourself some today. And everything that we've explored today, the sleep that keeps getting pushed, the nervous system running on a deficit, the standard that quietly dropped until functioning felt like thriving, all of that exists inside a life that never stops demanding more from us every day. It happens inside a life where a pace never pauses, where the demands keep arriving regardless of what the woman receiving them actually has left to give, where depletion gets normalized so completely that even the women experiencing it stop questioning whether it has to be this way and they accept it as a fact of life. And what I know from 4 decades of navigating the legal world, from watching women carry invisible costs that nobody around them acknowledges, that they don't even acknowledge, is that one of the most underestimated contributors to chronic depletion isn't just the workload. It's the isolation of carrying it alone, of believing that no one else around you feels the same way. The experience of performing at a high level while something underneath that performance is eroding and having nowhere to put that, nowhere to talk about the internal experience where it's understood without having to be explained, where you don't feel like you're being judged. No room where the cost is acknowledged rather than ignored. No one beside you who actually knows exactly what it takes to sustain what you're sustaining. And here's what I believe about isolation: it makes everything hard, not just emotionally, but physiologically. Because a nervous system that's consistently witnessed, consistently understood, consistently held in community, that nervous system carries less of the load alone, right? And a woman who doesn't have to translate her experience for everyone around her has more energy available for the life she's actually trying to build. You see, I believe that community isn't a luxury, it's infrastructure, just like sleep. And when you find the right one, a space where your experience is recognized without needing to be justified, where the women beside you already understand the weight that you're carrying, something shifts, not just in how supported you feel, but in how much capacity you have. Because you stop spending energy being alone in something that was never meant to be carried alone. And that's exactly why I want to build the Yes Reset community, a space specifically for women in the legal profession, an industry I've spent over 4 decades navigating. Because what this episode's really been about isn't just sleep. It's about what happens to women's vitality, her clarity, her steadiness, her capacity to be genuinely present for the life she's working so hard to build when she's been carrying the cost for too long and doing it alone, without a space that understands it, without women beside her who know exactly what it feels like, what it takes, without the kind of community that makes the load lighter, not by removing it, but by ensuring that she doesn't have to hold it in isolation anymore. And I've seen what that isolation actually looks like because women in those professional spaces are posting about it anonymously. And the fact that it's anonymous tells me something important. It tells me that women in these spaces still don't feel safe enough to say how they feel out loud under their own name. And that alone tells you everything about the environment they're operating in. Like the woman who was so depleted by her work environment, crying every day, physically sick every morning before she walked through the door, that she cleaned out her desk on a Friday and never went back. And the responses from other women in that thread, not shock, recognition, because so many of them had been there too, carrying the same thing alone. That's the disconnect I keep coming back to. Not just between what success is supposed to look like and what it actually costs to sustain it, but between how many women are carrying this quietly, this invisibly in isolation, and how rarely they have a space where that experience is simply understood, where they can be themselves, show their name, be genuinely who they are, where they don't have to perform being fine, where rest is spoken about openly and treated as the infrastructure it actually is, where the conversation we just had today isn't a one-time podcast episode, it's the baseline of how the community operates. And that's what I'm building. Not a space where you come to be fixed, but a space where you come to be witnessed, where the women around you already speak this language. We're doing life together with people who understand the weight of what you're carrying becomes the thing that restores what isolation has been depleting. And I want to build it with the women it's meant to serve, which means I need to hear from you. Not what I think you need, but what you're actually experiencing. So if this episode landed, if something in this conversation named something you've been carrying without having language for it, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me directly. My email is in the show notes, and you can share what's resonating with you and what you think would genuinely help. And for those of you willing to go a little deeper, I have a feedback form linked in the show notes as well. To share what kind of space would actually serve the challenges you're facing or that you believe women in law are facing every day, and what would actually make a difference. Because this profession isn't going away, right? And neither is the cost of navigating it alone. And so it's time to stop treating depletion as the price of ambition and stop carrying it alone. And that's why your feedback is so important to me and would be greatly appreciated. So be sure to check the show notes. Now, before you go, I'm inviting you to stay with me for just another minute, because what I hope you're starting to understand is what this episode has really been about. It's not about sleep hygiene, not optimization, and not about adding another thing to a life that already has so many things in it. It's been about the gap between what you're capable of and what you've been accepting as enough, and the quiet, sophisticated, completely understandable way that gap became visible. You're exceptional at protecting what matters, your calendar, your commitments to people who depend on you. And somewhere in all of that protecting, you negotiated away the one thing everything else runs on. Not because you don't care about yourself, but because you've learned that the measure of a capable woman is what she produces, not what she protects, not what she restores, just what she delivers. And so you deliver on less sleep than your body needed, on a nervous system running on a deficit that kept widening while you kept calling it fine, and on reserves you kept drawing from without ever stopping to ask what was actually left. And that's the honest truth of it. And the thing is, running your life this way has worked for a long time, right? You've functioned impressively on it. But functioning is not the same thing as thriving. And the version of you who's been showing up every day, delivering, holding it together, and never letting the cost show, she's been doing it with one hand tied behind her back. So I want to be direct with you one more time before we close. Your decisions deserve a brain that has been restored. Your relationships deserve a woman who has access to her own patience, not a version of herself managing its absence. Your work deserves the quality of thinking that arrives when your nervous system has had what it needs, not the version of you you've been excavating through effort and willpower. And the life you're building, the extraordinary one, deserves to be built by a woman who's genuinely thriving inside it, not just delivering from it. Sleep is not a wellness topic. It's not a luxury that your schedule allows for when everything else is handled. It's the infrastructure your entire life is built on. And if what you've been calling thriving is actually just a more polished version of surviving, then you've been building on a foundation that's been neglected for far longer than you've been willing to acknowledge. And that ends today, right here, right now. Not with a protocol, not with a to-do list, but with a decision that functioning is the floor and you were always capable of more. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, keep dreaming, keep believing, and keep designing your extraordinary life one day at a time.
Thank you for joining me on Her Extraordinary Life by Design. I hope you've been inspired and empowered by the incredible stories shared on this show. If you enjoyed this episode and the conversations we've had, I would greatly appreciate if you could take a moment to leave a review. Your feedback and support mean the world to me, and it will help others discover the podcast and join our empowering community. Remember to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Together, we can continue to learn from these amazing women, uncover their extraordinary journeys, and be motivated to create our own lives by design. Thank you again for tuning in. Until next time, stay empowered and keep shaping your extraordinary life one day at a time.
Everyone has heard about the U.S. space program, but what is actually going on at NASA? Get the real story in 4 minutes or less with the NASA Daily podcast from Electricast. Join astronauts and researchers as they conduct groundbreaking experiments, work on the International Space Station, and reach for the stars. NASA Daily, your cosmic update.
Electricast. Hey guys, this is Peter Rafelson, and I am the president of Electricast Media, and I am so honored today to introduce you to an upcoming podcast called Coding and Jamming with Jacob, and I have our very special guest and host of the show, Jacob Deal. Say hello, Jake.
Hey everyone, looking forward to getting started with you.
Tell us in 10 seconds what you're going to be doing on this show.
I'm going to be teaching everyone how to code from C to JavaScript to HTML, and on the side we're going to play a little music. I think you're going to learn a lot.
Sounds educational and fun. Count me in wherever you listen to podcasts.
Electricast.